Let's take an early look at the mid-air collision between a Piper Malibu and a Cessna 172 at North Las Vegas Airport earlier this week. The Cessna 172 took off on the left runway and entered the right pattern for runway 30 right at North Las Vegas Airport. It did multiple patterns. It looks like it was a pattern-only sortie, and it was on its 7th pattern when it collided with the Malibu. Meanwhile, the Malibu was flying in from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Both airplanes had 2 occupants in them. The Malibu was cleared to fly overhead and cleared to land on runway 30 left. It appears from ADSB tracking data that what actually happened is the Malibu flew midfield overhead the runway, began a constant left-hand turn, and set up for landing on the right runway. It appears that way just looking at ADSB tracks, because the Malibu and the Cessna 172, their collision occurs on the extended center line of the right runway, and the wreckage from both airplanes landed along the center line of the right runway also. So it looks like the cause of this accident will be straightforward: a mid-air collision where, based on ADSB data, the Malibu attempted to land on the right runway when it was actually cleared to land on the left runway. One person aboard the Malibu is greeted by a local voice as they enter the pattern of the communications at North Las Vegas, as you can hear on this audio clip.
North Las Vegas, Tower, November 9 X-ray is descending with 7,000 surrounding on 30 left, and now it's just across midfield.
Hello, Carol.
Hi.
Where are you coming from?
So at least one person in the Malibu was familiar with the operations at North Las Vegas. As you can also hear on the audio clip, the Malibu is given clearance to land on 30 left and acknowledges that 2 separate times.
Number 7 Charlie X-ray, runway 30 left, clear to land.
30 left, clear to land on 7 Charlie X-ray.
7 Charlie X-ray, I think I said it right. 30 left, 7 Charlie X-ray, runway 30 left.
Weapon 0 left, that's what I heard, 97 Charlie X-ray.
So despite some familiarity with North Las Vegas Airport, it appears like the Malibu lines up on the wrong runway. The tower controller may seem to notice that the Malibu's a little bit tight for the left runway, because it confirms that they actually gave the Malibu landing clearance on the left runway, which the Malibu then acknowledged. So it's unclear why that happened. When it's clear transmission between the tower and the Malibu, twice that the clearance is on the left runway, the Malibu still lines up on the right runway. The NTSB will likely classify this as both a mid-air collision and a wrong surface event. So let's talk about wrong surface events for a minute. About 85% of wrong surface events happen at small to medium airports like North Las Vegas. About 85% of wrong surface events are caused by general aviation pilots. And there's some 300 plus wrong surface events a year that are reported. Some 90% of wrong surface events happen in day VFR conditions where the visibility is greater than 3 miles. And all of those elements occurred in this situation. The weather wasn't a factor in this midair. Winds were light, high temperature of 100 degrees around noon in Las Vegas, which is pretty typical this time of year. And the sun would have been very high in the sky and really not much of a factor for visibility for either of the airplanes. So it seems like this may be a case which illustrates continuation bias. So continuation bias comes from 2 things. We as humans tend to see what we want to see and see what we expect to see. And so perhaps as the Malibu came into that continuous left-hand turn, even though it was repeated about the left runway, they expected and lined up on the right runway. Maybe. It's too early to determine. Or maybe some visual cues here on this particular sortie had them thinking they actually were lined up on the left runway. If we take a look at wrong surface runway operations, one of the high causes of them is parallel runways and offset parallel runways like we see at North Las Vegas Airport. So one of the lessons that we GA pilots can take from this is understanding that when we come into visual approaches or visual operations into parallel runways that are offset, there's a high potential for wrong surface operations. So confirming that we see both runways and that the runway we're lined up on is in fact the runway that we're cleared to land on. Adding some sort of confirmation in that will be time well spent for us GA pilots. As far as the midair portion goes, this looks like a classic low wing coming from on high, high wing coming from on low collision. And as you can see here, a pilot in a high wing airplane has restricted visibility looking up. The pilot in the low wing, restricted visibility looking down. And that's where we frequently see the high wing, low wing collisions happen. And that's likely why neither pilot saw each other. Both, it appears from ADS-B tracks, both were in slight turns, so both were focused ahead and forward on the runway with their peripheral vision blocked by their wingspans. So what we can learn from that is doing good belly checks before we roll in on a runway or turn on final. We're all taught before you make that base to final turn to roll and make sure that final's clear before you go belly up to final. In this case, in these slight turns, such a belly check would have been helpful for both airplanes to make sure that final was clear. Whether or not it would have prevented it is unknown, and they may have done that and we don't pick it up on ADS-B tracks. It's just helpful to reinforce the importance of that belly check before you turn on final. We'll keep you updated on anything else we learn of this accident. Thanks for watching and thanks for supporting AOPA so we can continue to provide this kind of analysis that helps keep GA safe.